A cold wind moved through the alien forest, carrying thin purple mist between the tall glowing trees. The ground was wet and soft, covered with blue leaves that made a quiet cracking sound under every step. The forest looked peaceful from far away, but anyone living here knew the truth. This place was dangerous. The air had poison pockets hidden in many corners, and strange animals watched silently from the shadows. Human rescue scout Jace Rowan moved carefully through the trees, his boots sinking in the soft soil. His scanner beeped again and again, showing a weak life signal ahead. He followed the blinking light with serious eyes. He had been searching for survivors from a crashed alien transport for 2 hours. And this was the first real sign of life. When he reached the next clearing, he stopped. There, lying on the twisted roots of a glowing blue tree, was a small alien boy. His skin was pale gray, his eyes half closed, and his breathing shallow and fast. He looked maybe 7 or 8 years old. His fingers twitched weakly, and purple lines on his arm showed poison spreading through his veins. Jace dropped to his knees beside him. Hey. Stay with me, Jace said softly, even though the boy probably didn't understand human words. He gently lifted the child's head and checked his pulse. It was faint, very faint. Jace opened his backpack and pulled out a med kit. He needed the antidote fast. But before he could inject the boy, the forest suddenly echoed with a sharp cry. A shadow jumped out from behind a rock. Tall alien woman rushed forward, her eyes wide, her breathing heavy, and her hands glowing with fear and panic. She slid between Jace and the boy like a shield, her long dark hair flying behind her. Her skin was a deep blue-green, and she held a sharp stone blade in one hand. She pointed the blade at Jace's chest. Jace raised both hands slowly. Easy. I'm here to help. The alien woman didn't understand him. She shouted something in her own language, her voice full of anger, fear, and pain. Her legs were shaking, and her eyes never left her son's small, dying body. The boy let out a weak cry. The woman's blade trembled. Jace kept his voice calm. I don't want to hurt him. But she took one step closer, the blade almost touching his chest now. Her face was full of confusion. To her, a human soldier near her dying child could mean only one thing: danger. The forest wind grew louder, and the purple mist swirled around them. Then something unexpected happened. The alien woman dropped the blade. It fell to the ground with a soft thud. She fell on her knees in front of Jace and lowered her head, shaking with fear. She placed her hands on the ground, her forehead nearly touching the dirt. It was a desperate gesture, one that Jace understood even without knowing her language. She thought Jace would only save the child if she offered herself. Her voice trembled as she spoke in broken, fearful tones, saying something Jace didn't understand but could feel. Her hands pointed to herself, then to her child, then to Jace. The meaning was horribly clear. Take me. Hurt me. Do whatever you want. Just save my son. Jace's chest tightened with shock and anger, not at her, but at the idea that she believed this was the only way. No, he said strongly, his voice warm but firm. I'm not here to hurt anyone. She looked up slowly, eyes shaking, not believing him. She waited for him to demand something. But Jace only picked up the boy gently, holding him close like he would hold any injured child. When the mother saw Jace carry her son instead of harming him, her eyes widened in surprise. Jace opened his medkit quickly, but then he froze. The antidote vial was gone. His heart dropped. He searched the kit, the pockets, everything. No, he whispered. The vial should have been right there. It was the key ingredient to stop the poison. Without it, the boy would not survive. The alien mother saw his panic and misunderstood again. She grabbed his arm tightly, shaking him, thinking he was refusing to help. Tears ran down her face as she cried out, pointing again and again to her son. Jace shook his head. It's not that. The cure is missing. She didn't understand that, so Jace pointed inside the med kit. He lifted it to show the empty slot where the vial used to be. He spread his hands to show, it's gone. The mother's face changed from fear to pure terror. She screamed, a deep, broken scream that echoed across the forest and made nearby birds run into the sky. The boy's breathing grew weaker. His head rested against Jace's shoulder. Limp, Jace took a deep breath and forced himself to think clearly. Someone stole the vial. That meant someone was nearby. He looked around the clearing and saw small footprints, not human. Not the mother's, but tiny, clawed prints leading away from the tree roots. Jace knew instantly who took it. Scarns, small forest scavengers who loved stealing shiny objects. He stood up fast. The mother grabbed his arm again, fear still in her eyes. She thought he was leaving them. But Jace pointed to the footprints, then to the boy, then toward the forest. He tried to say with his hands, the cure is taken. I must get it back. Follow me. The mother understood only one part. The human was going after the thing that could save her son. She nodded quickly, wiping tears from her face. She picked up her blade again and followed close behind Jace, her steps weak but full of determination. Together, they moved through the glowing forest, following the tiny footprints. The mother stayed close to her son, touching his hair, whispering soft words in their language, trying to keep him awake. Jace kept scanning the area, checking every direction. The deeper they went, the darker the forest became. Strange violet lights hung in the air like fireflies. The ground became more uneven. Tree roots twisted like snakes. Every step made the mother flinch. She didn't trust Jace yet, but she wanted to. She watched him closely, how he carried her son with care, how he looked for danger, how he didn't demand anything from her. For the first time, she wondered if maybe humans were not all monsters. But then the boy let out a sharp cry, and his breathing stopped. For 2 long seconds, the mother screamed his name and rushed forward. Jace immediately knelt, shaking the boy gently. Come on, kid. Stay with me. Stay awake. The boy gasped weakly and breathed again, but the breath was thin, soft, and fragile. Jace single quotes, S hands shook for the first time that day. The mother fell beside them, touching her son's face, her voice shaking with fear. They didn't have much time. If they didn't get the antidote soon, the child would not survive. The Scarns had taken it, and they were deeper in the forest, where bigger dangers waited. Jace lifted the boy again. More carefully this time, he looked at the mother. She looked at him. No words were exchanged, but an agreement formed between them. They would save the boy together, no matter what it cost. The forest grew darker. The air grew colder, and the footprints led into a place no human usually entered. The mother took a deep breath, fear trembling in her chest. But she walked forward anyway, because her son's life was the only thing that mattered. And Jace followed with strong steps. Then far ahead, he heard the clicking sound of Scarn voices, and the part of the forest where no light reached. The Scarn footprints led Jace and Lyra deeper into the forest, where the glowing blue trees changed into tall dark ones with twisted branches. The light here was dim, and the purple mist grew thicker. Strange clicking sounds echoed around them, sounds that made even strong warriors nervous. Lyra, the alien mother, walked close beside Jace now. She no longer pointed her blade at him. She kept looking at her son lying in Jace's arms, watching every breath he struggled to take. His skin grew colder, turning from pale gray to a dangerous bluish color. His small fingers twitched weakly against Jace's arm. Every moment felt like a countdown. Jace tightened his grip on the boy and kept moving. We'll get the antidote, he said softly. Even though she couldn't understand his words, Lyra still looked confused at times, unsure if the human was truly helping or secretly planning something else. But every time she saw Jace checking the boy's temperature, or whispering comforting words, or holding the child the way a father might hold his own son, her fear weakened a little. They reached a narrow path between two massive stone pillars. The scarn footprints continued forward. The clicking sounds grew louder. Lyra touched Jace's arm gently and pointed to the stones. She whispered something in her language, voice shaking. Jace didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear in her eyes. "This is Scarn territory, right?" He guessed softly. She nodded slowly. Scarns were small but dangerous, quick, sharp-clawed, smart, and always hunting in groups. They liked shiny things, bright metal, glowing crystals. And Jace's antidote vial was perfect treasure for them. He shifted the medkit on his shoulder and looked around. "We move carefully." Lyra nodded again. They walked down the narrow path, the ground changing into dark mud. The trees leaned inward, as if watching them. Strange leaves brushed against Jace's shoulders, releasing small clouds of purple dust that made his eyes water. Suddenly Lyra grabbed his wrist and pulled him aside. A second later, a thin bone rope snapped down from above, right where Jace had been standing. If she hadn't pulled him, it would have wrapped around his neck. Jace stared at her in shock. "She saved him." Lyra whispered something urgently and pointed up at the branches. Jace looked up. Tiny scarns crawled across the branches, their yellow eyes glowing, their small claws tapping against the wood. They moved like fast insects, disappearing and reappearing between leaves. They were watching, waiting, testing. Jace whispered, "They know we're here." Lyra nodded, gripping her stone blade tightly. Her hands shook, but her eyes stayed sharp. She wasn't afraid for herself, only for her son. The boy let out a weak cough, his breathing growing faster, and weaker at the same time. His small body was getting colder. Jace felt panic rising inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He looked at Lyra and made a gesture with his hand, pointing forward. "We must hurry." She understood. They moved faster, stepping over roots, ducking under branches, avoiding bone ropes and sticky webs the Scarns had set as traps. The clicking sounds surrounded them now, echoing from every direction. Finally, the forest opened into a small clearing. Jace stopped. Lyra's eyes widened. Up ahead, the Scarn camp glowed with soft green light from hundreds of tiny crystals hanging from branches. Small huts made of bones, leaves, and sticks were scattered around. Scarns ran between them, carrying objects they had stolen from. Travelers. And right in the center, hanging from a tall crystal tree, was the antidote vial. It shone like a silver star among the green light. Jace almost sighed with relief, but then he saw the Scarn guards, more than a dozen of them, crawling around the tree. Their claws clicked loudly. Their sharp teeth glowed under the strange forest lights. Their eyes locked onto Jace with hungry curiosity. Lyra stepped behind Jace, gently touching her son's face with trembling hands. The boy did not react. His breathing was so weak, now it barely moved his chest. Jace clenched his fist. "We don't have time." He scanned the clearing. They needed the vial. But fighting a full Scarn group was suicide, especially while holding the child. Lyra whispered something in a desperate tone, pointing to the other side of the camp. A small tunnel, barely visible under the glowing bushes. Jace followed her gesture. "Back entrance. Maybe they could sneak through." Jace nodded. "Good, let's try." They moved along the edge of the clearing, keeping low, staying in the shadows. Lyra's steps were careful, quiet, like she had done this many times before. Jace moved slowly, using his training to stay hidden. When they reached the tunnel, Jace passed the boy gently to Lyra. She pulled her son close and held him like a fragile treasure. Jace crawled through the tunnel first. The ground was cold, and sharp stones pressed against his palms. Lyra followed, crawling slowly to avoid hurting the boy. The tunnel opened behind the crystal tree. The vial dangled above them, only a few meters away. Jace whispered, "I'll get it." Lyra nodded, eyes full of hope and fear. Jace climbed the roots of the crystal tree slowly. Every movement had to be silent. Every breath had to be soft. His fingers wrapped around the glowing roots as he pulled himself up. He reached the vial. His hand touched the metal. The cold surface made his heart leap. But then a high-pitched screech tore through the air. Jac froze. Lyra looked up in horror. Dozens of Skarns rushed toward the tree, their tiny bodies moving like a wave of dark blue fur. Their claws clicked like knives hitting stone. Jace ripped the vial off the branch and jumped down, landing beside Lyra. "Run!" he shouted. Lyra held the boy tightly and ran with all her strength. Jace sprinted beside her, pushing branches away, dodging roots, trying not to drop the precious vial. But the Skarns were faster. One of them jumped on Lyra's leg and stabbed her with its tiny bone spear. She screamed and fell to her knees, the boy almost slipping from her arms. Jace grabbed her before she hit the ground. More Skarns surrounded them, forming a tight circle. Their clicking sounds grew louder, echoing through the forest like drums. Their leader stepped forward, taller than the others, with long curved claws and glowing red markings across its head. It hissed. Lyra tried to stand, but her leg gave out. Blood dripped down her ankle, staining the dark leaves. Jac held the vial in one hand and supported Lyra and the child with the other. But he couldn't fight and protect them both, not against so many. The Skarns closed in. Lyra looked at Jace with terrified eyes. Her voice trembled with understanding. If Jace fought while holding her and the boy, they would all die. If he dropped her, he could save the child. She shook her head in fear, knowing the impossible choice he faced. Jace clenched his teeth. He refused both choices. He grabbed Lyra with one arm, the boy with the other, and took a deep breath. "Hold on." The Skarns rushed forward. Jace threw a flash flare from his belt. The bright white explosion lit up the forest, blinding everything around them. The Skarns screamed and stumbled backward, covering their eyes. Jace didn't waste a second. He lifted Lyra onto his shoulder, cradled the boy against his chest, and ran, full speed, into the dark trees. Branches cut his arms. Rocks tore at his boots. But he didn't stop. Lyra held onto him weakly, blood dripping from her leg. Her son hung limp in Jace's other arm. The Skarns, angry roars followed them through the forest. Jace ran until he reached a hidden cave under a giant fallen tree. He slid inside, breathing hard. Lyra collapsed against the cave wall, holding her son. The boy barely breathed. His skin was cold like ice. Jac the antidote vial. The silver liquid glowed faintly. Lyra looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, waiting. Jace took a deep breath. They were safe for now. But if the antidote didn't work, the child would not see another sunrise. Inside the small dark cave beneath the fallen giant tree, everything felt silent except for the shaky breathing of the dying child. Jace knelt down, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he held the glowing antidote vial. Lyra sat against the cave wall, her injured leg bleeding slowly, her arms wrapped tightly around her son. Her eyes were wide with fear, hope, and pain all at once. Jace shook the vial gently. "Please work," he whispered to himself. He opened the seal and drew the silver liquid into a small injector. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear for himself, but from fear of losing the boy he had carried through death and danger. Lyra watched every movement. Her fingers dug into the cave soil. She whispered her son's name again and again, like a soft prayer in her alien language. Jace placed the injector gently against the boy's neck. "Just hang on, little guy." He pressed the injector. The silver antidote entered the child's body, glowing faintly beneath the skin. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The boy's eyes remained closed, his breathing thin and slow. Lyra leaned forward, her entire body shaking. Jace checked the child's pulse again. Still weak, he waited, hoping, praying. Then the boy gasped out just one small breath. Then another. And another. His color, slowly, very slowly, began to change. Blue turned to gray. And gray turned to a soft, healthy violet. Lyra let out a broken cry, covering her mouth with her hands. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She bent forward, pressing her forehead against her son's, whispering gratitude. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Jace let out the breath he had been holding. He gently wiped the boy's forehead. He's okay. He's coming back. Lyra didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, the relief in Jace's voice. She looked up at him with deep, overwhelmed eyes. Her fear of him, something she carried for years, began to melt like frost under warm sunlight. Jace gave her a small smile, tired but kind. Lyra reached toward his hand softly, touching his wrist with shaky fingers. It was not a romantic touch. It was not a gift. It was simply gratitude. The deepest kind. Her lips trembled. She spoke in her language, soft, respectful, and full of meaning. Jace couldn't understand the words, but he understood her eyes. Then the cave shook. Jace immediately grabbed his rifle and turned toward the entrance. The Skarns had found them, outside. Their clicking voices echoed like hundreds of knives tapping stone. Shadows of small bodies moved past the cave entrance. The leader's sharp silhouette stood tall, claws glowing, head markings bright red. Lyra flinched and held her son tighter. Jace lifted his rifle slightly. "Stay behind me." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the order. She crawled back, keeping the child protectively behind her. Jace aimed toward the shadows. One Skarn leaped into the cave, hissing. Claws ready. Jace fired a short stun pulse. The Skarn hit the wall and dropped. More shadows moved outside. They were preparing to rush all at once. Jace swallowed hard. He knew he didn't have enough ammo to fight an entire swarm. He knew he couldn't leave the cave safely. He knew he couldn't protect Lyra and her son alone. He looked at them. Lyra met his eyes, her body still weak, her leg bleeding, but her spirit unbroken. She reached for her stone blade. Jace shook his head. "No, you're hurt." She pointed to herself, then to him, then to her son. Her meaning was clear. "We fight together." Jace hesitated for a moment. Then not a dot. They waited. The Skarn screamed, then rushed. 3 jumped inside the cave at once. Jace fired again, hitting 2. The third landed on his chest, clawing at his armor. Jace grabbed it and threw it against the stone. Lyra, even injured, struck another Skarn with her blade, her face full of fierce determination. She fought like a mother protecting life, sharp, fast, fueled by love. She kicked a second Skarn, away with her uninjured leg. Jace blocked 3 more with his arm and fired again. The cave air filled with dust. Screams, flashing lights. But the Skarns kept coming, outside. The leader screeched and jumped forward, ready to enter the cave. Jace aimed for the leader. The leader suddenly dashed aside with incredible speed. "Damn!" Jace gritted his teeth. The leader lunged at Lyra. Jace threw himself between them, taking the hit on his armor. The leader's claws scraped sparks across Jace's chest plate. Jace grabbed its arm and slammed it to the ground. Lyra limped forward and stabbed the Skarn leader through the shoulder. It howled in rage, scraping the cave floor with its claws. Still not dead. Jace grabbed Lyra's arm gently and pulled her back. Before the leader could retaliate, the Skarn leader raised both claws, ready to strike them down. Small voice cried weakly, "Mother!" The boy, awake. Lyra turned, tears filling her eyes. The child's faint cry stopped the leader for a single second. A flash of confusion crossed its glowing eyes. A child calling for his mother. Even Scarns understood the meaning. Jace didn't waste that. Second, he grabbed a heavy rock from the cave floor and slammed it into the leader's head with full force. The leader collapsed. The remaining Scarns growled, unsure. Looking at their fallen leader, Jace stood with blood on his forehead. Breathing hard, he pointed his rifle at the shadows and shouted, "Leave! Go!" The Scarns looked at the leader, then at the furious human, then at the wounded but fearless Lyra, and at the child now breathing strongly. The forest fell silent. One by one, the Scarns backed away. Their shadows disappeared into the trees. At last, the clicking stopped. The forest was quiet again. Jace dropped the rock, exhausted. His arms shook. Sweat dripped from his chin. Lyra crawled toward him, her eyes full of something new. Not fear, not confusion, but deep respect. She touched his shoulder softly, her hand shaking. She spoke a single word in her language, "Protector." Jace didn't understand, but he felt the weight of it. Lyra moved to her son and held him close. The boy reached out weakly toward Jace, touching the human's hand with tiny fingers. His eyes were soft and full of wonder. Jace smiled. They waited in the cave for an hour until they were sure the Scarns had left for good. Then Jace lifted the child again, carefully, gently, like carrying something sacred. Lyra stood slowly, leaning on the cave wall. Her injured leg was weak, but she refused to let Jace carry her. She wanted to walk on her own, to show honor. Together, they left the cave and moved through the forest towards safer ground. The glowing trees slowly brightened as they walked. Sunlight began to break through the treetops. At the edge of the forest, Jace stopped. Lyra stepped beside him, her son in her arms. The child slept peacefully now, breathing normally. Lyra turned toward Jace and did something unexpected. She touched her forehead to the back of his hand. A deep, ancient gesture among her people. A gesture meaning, "You saved my life. You saved my child. You are now family." Jace swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the honor. He didn't know their language, but he understood the feeling. Lyra spoke softly, placing her hand over her heart. Jace placed his hand over his own heart in return. The mother smiled, the first true smile she had shown him. And as the sun rose over the forest, Jace realized something important. Human kindness had changed a life today. And maybe it changed two worlds. The end.